Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Community Health and Capital podcast with the 19 Hills Kick. I'm here with Tim Hall, who's come from Citizens UK. Hi, Tim.
Hello.
And the focus of the podcast and the discussion today is all about community organising, which I think it's fair to say, Tim, Citizens UK has got a lot of experience of. Tell us how you first got involved with the organisation.
Yeah, happily. Thanks very much, Johnny, for the invite to participate in this podcast. So Citizens UK, just for those that don't know us, we're a civic alliance, an alliance of civil society organisations, the largest in the UK with about 550 civil society institutions that are members. That's schools, universities, colleges, um, faith communities, trade unions, third sector organizations, and increasingly health organizations as well. Um, Fundamentally, our raison d'etre, the purpose, our mission really is to support people through their institutions to win change for their families, for their communities, for their cities, regions, and countries. Um, and we do that really. Institutions are a key part of our approach. It's institutions that we take into membership. So we're a membership organisation, and it's institutions that we take into membership, and that enables us to develop, if you like, structures of accountability which are sustainable as people come and go in their positions, but institutions and their civic missions, if you like, remain. I got involved actually. I was a university lecturer for many years. I taught politics at East London University, and I kind of gradually moved really from the chalk and talk model of politics to the craft. And to be honest, it was a surprise to me to learn that there really was a kind of craft, similar really in a way to, I guess, how actors must feel in relation to Shakespeare, as opposed to literary critics or something like that, a kind of living, breathing tradition transmitted down generations, etc. That existed in politics I wasn't aware of, and it excited me. I started working with the kind of founding chapter of Citizens UK, which is called Telco, um, and it really went from there. I was involved in living wage campaigns in making the Royal Docks area, which is the former docks in the east of London, the living wage zone. Places like City Airport, Excel, University of London, obviously Newham Council, even stretching out to London Stadium, all now living wage employers. Um, then I was involved in setting up a chapter in Peterborough. Uh, and then I was invited, invited in, if you like, and my role really is academic in residence in Citizens UK, and that means that I lead on our relations with the universities nationally, but also building a chapter in Cambridge, which is where I live, and I'm speaking to you from now.
Okay. It must be fascinating to bring that kind of huge experience and kind of theoretical background and almost to kind of put it into practice really when probably a lot of people's careers kind of more the kind of practical side before they kind of go into a kind of more academic perspective. But no, thank you so much for joining, Tim. So obviously, you've touched on a lot of the initiatives that you've been involved with. And I think Citizens UK um has always been an inspiring force, I think, really, from where I've been standing really at a distance. But the thing we wanted to talk about was, we have a social enterprise that is looking to be community led. And I think we were having a bit of a chat before this, weren't we, around kind of what the kind of differences are between a kind of a traditional community engagement approach that I think a lot of people are still encouraged to pursue. We've got lots of colleagues that have subscribed and promoted the asset-based community development model, and obviously Cormac Russell is amongst them. That's really been kind of championing that philosophy. Citizens UK takes a different approach when it comes to community organising. It's fair to say, doesn't it? I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I mean, there are certain kind of fundamental principles from which organizing, um, you know, starts from. One is people before program. That's to say that before we would take any kind of action, before we would engage in any kind of campaigning, we build relationships, as it were, and support the building of relationships. Um, and the second is never do for others what we call the iron law of organizing, which is never do for others what they can do for themselves. That comes not from a kind of 19th century ethic of self-reliance, or it's in there somewhere really, but it comes more from um, the idea that if you prevent people from acting on their own issue, from from finding common purpose with others and affecting their own change, then you take something from them really quite important and quite central to what it is to be human. Um, so those two principles, I guess, would put us in a slightly different place to say something like a community development model, say asset-based community development, um, because we don't deliver services. We don't do things for people. We support people to organise and do things for themselves. So that means people before program, and that means look, if you want to organise and build a power alliance, we'll support you, but we're not going to do a campaign for you. That's up to you, and that's up to the the power that you build. So we provide the kind of if you like the toolbox for doing that, but then it's down to you. Uh, again, because this is a key feature of what it is to be a flourishing human being, to be able to see stuff and change stuff. It's frustrating you and holding you back. Um, so we don't start from a service delivery perspective, and organising is different to that. This is a long-winded answer, but in a nutshell, um, and I think this is kind of what we were chatting about before. Um, the kind of missing part of the equation for community development is power. And if a key part of the kind of contemporary, dilemma, we call it polarization or disaffection or whatever, if a key part of that is a sense of powerlessness, which then is kind of manipulatable in various ways, then to address that, how do you in your community, in your residents association, as a school parent, as a congregant, how do you set about addressing that, finding common interests with others, building power, working up what your priorities are as an organization, as an individual, as an organization, as an alliance, and then acting on that. So I think that's the key difference, really, addressing the issue of the pervading, ubiquitous feeling of powerlessness, and supporting people to make their own change.
And I'm sure we could think of several reasons why an institution like health or like the NHS would um, I suppose sometimes struggle with kind of adopting this approach really. And I think it's interesting that Citizens deliberately takes a what we're looking to do is strengthen institutions because we know that they're long lasting and they're everlasting and they've been there before we turn up to try and make a change and they'll probably be there after we make a change. But institutions can also have their own ingrained interests and preferred ways of working. Um, but on top of that, an institution, the NHS, probably it's fair to say, is quite hierarchical in terms of the kind of um, practitioners that practice in it, really. I think medicine's come some way in terms of kind of trying to level that playing field in a consultation, in a clinical setting. And I think that's still quite variable, it's fair to say, from person to person. But we had a podcast several episodes ago with Jenny Poppy from Lancaster University, and we were touching on the fact that the difference between, on the one hand, on a clinical level, in a consultation, when you go to see a doctor, you go to see a nurse, you are more likely to be involved in the decisions that complete that consultation than in years gone by. But we still have a long way to go in terms of actually putting the general public and patients and service users at the table when it comes to management and leadership of what the health service should be doing and spending money on and where it should be open and all the rest of it. Um, Despite that, I think you were talking about some examples of health organizations and health trusts that have started to come on this journey with you guys in Citizens UK. And just wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about what that's involved.
Yes, I can. I mean, I'll give you an example, um, of where I've been involved in this. When we were setting up a chapter in Peterborough, it was COVID time, so um, there's predominance of a preponderance of schools in membership there, and when we asked, you know, the members, what their what was putting them under pressure, what came forward from the schools very strongly was mental health, in terms of the staff teaching and, trying to respond to need. And of course, unmet need, amongst young people in the city. So what we did there was we organised a summit. Um, we, told told the schools to go off and do some listening within their own institution. Um, and on the basis of that, developed an agenda. Some young people bravely stepped forward and told their stories, if you like, or shared their experience of, feeling unsupported, not being able to access, be able to get a diagnosis or access services, etc. We invited the local MP. We invited what was then called the CCG, now is ICB, I think, Integrated Care Board. And at the end of that summit, we invited both the MP, well, those young people invited the MP to meet regularly to figure out how to bring more resource into the city, as that was clearly one issue. And also the CCG as well to meet regularly to work out how to improve, make more accessible, make better what already existed. Thereafter, groups of young people, they organised themselves really at that point. They used to run those meetings, meet monthly with the MP, meet monthly with the CCG. Amongst the things that they were able to secure was finding a particular area in the A&E facility for young people, safe space for them to wait, mental health training for A&E nurses. They began work on a feasibility study, or working on a feasibility study for um, sanctuary specifically for young people. And with the MP, that led to what is now a national campaign for citizens. And what the Labour government have all but signed up for, which is school-based counselling. Um, so, there's an example. And there was the CCG, they were only too pleased. They were, delighted, to have, to arrive at meetings. The young people had already worked up the agenda, said, well, this is what we want to talk to you about today. Can you bring this person in the room, etc. It's a very different structure. I mean, if you create a kind of community panel, then you get a, different set of people around the table. You tend to get, particular interest groups, important, representing, specific interests, specific sections of the population. But what you don't have is that broad engagement of civil society. That schools, we have trade unions, Unison were a key part of that group too. Um, so that's a different dynamic. It's rather than, I guess you're moving away from something like patient voice and health organizations, you know, creating bodies through which, patient voice is there to one in which it's a kind of ongoing negotiation, really, of organized civil society in the city that has worked out what its common interests is, and then develops that agenda itself. So there's an example. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, more broadly, I'll shut up in a minute, but more broadly, it's kind of difficult because health, I mean, fundamentally, civic alliances um, exist to hold the state and the market to account. We create structures of accountability, respectful as well. I mean, many people, in public office positions of power initially, not greatly pleased to hear from us, but in a matter of time, they very much are, because we, help them achieve, things that they went into politics to want to do, and people in positions of power, people in public office need engaged publics to work with, etc. Um, but there is this issue, isn't it, with health organisations? Is it part of the state? I mean, universities have this as well, in a sense. They're so configured towards service delivery that it's tricky then to bring in a different way of working. And of course, there will always be budget holders. There will always be, this is the structure of decision making in the NHS. But it'd be nice to think that these kinds of models could be explored more. And I think what you were alluding to earlier was the relationship established between South London citizens and I'm going to get this wrong now, the Royal Maudsley Foundation Trust there. It's called South London Listens, and it's really it's a step up from patient voice. We're no longer thinking about patient voice, thinking about this holistically. What do communities want, and how do we go about here, understanding that in a concerted and intentional way. And, we'll go with that wherever it leads. And of course, in the preventative area, everything's connected, isn't it? I mean, you can't get a bus, or if there's nothing, if there's nothing for young people to do other than sit in their bedrooms on their iPhones, etc., that arrives down the line at your door, as it were. So that there is this kind of understanding of a kind of the holistic nature of health issues, which of course you know.
And it's interesting you bring that up, Tim, because I think we were saying before the podcast that in the many of the conversations that have happened to date between some of the local services and social enterprise and people in the local area, top of the list that's come up in conversations often been, well, is this going to help me get a GP appointment, really? Which, is, I think, on the one hand, quite critical because focusing for a second on public service delivery, there aren't many existing public services that haven't remained open universally to all population groups for any need or any issue. And, during a period of austerity where services justifiably or understandably or understandably not have had to go, well, we've had to focus on a certain age group, or we've had to kind of maybe lift our referral criteria. We know that general practices are still that, not the only last remaining front door, but still one of the few left. On the other hand, as you've just touched on and put far more eloquently than I could really, health is about more than medicine. It's about more than getting a GP appointment. And we know we need to aim higher. But I just wondered in the last maybe section of the podcast, Tim, just to talk about the practicalities of how this would work, where it could start and how you would build it. There's something that I know colleagues have said before around the dangers of further institutionalizing what is supposed to be community-led power, is having a paid organizer um damaging that really. But where would you start if you wanted to bring community organizing to a small local area, and how do you think it would need to play out?
Yeah, good question. Well, there are some issues there in the sense because we're a membership organisation, so organisers we don't chase grant, soft money or what we call soft money or grant funding because that comes with an agenda already attached, as it were. And of course, we do get grant money, but the key thing is that the integrity of the community, organising itself, recovering the capacity to set its own priorities, as it were. And if you take that away with a big dollop of grant funding, then there's something lost crucially. So it does depend on a certain density of, of institutions that could be members that could support an organizer. But there are ways around that. And also geographies as well. I'm organising Cambridge. The city of Cambridge, the centre of it is, it's pretty small. You can kind of, walk from, the diameter, in a reasonable amount of time. But of course, the relation to the surrounding area is quite intense. A lot of people kind of coming in, studying in the city, working in the city, living outside, as it were. So, there are those kinds of connections, and it depends how you define Cambridge. It's not that narrow walled city, as it were. It's, 30 miles around as well, which is how that's the kind of heat map, if you like, of the city. But how you'd go around it, really, how you'd set about that is by bringing people together. In for us, we would, you know, be, contact the main faith institutions in the city, the academy trusts as well. These are relatively new institutions that are in the process of, working out what they're for, beyond back office savings, etc. Um, um, University is also key as well. We would bring and create bring together a conversation of civic leaders to work out if there's an appetite for working in this way, and build on that really. But there is a Citizens Wales. There's a Cardiff Citizens Wales, and the geography of Wales means that you're running lines to what are outposts, for example. So there's work going on in Aberystwyth, which Aberystwyth doesn't have the kind of density of civil society institutions to support an organizer, but with a kind of a network type approach, you can get around that. Um, and Yeah, I mean, it's a test in a way. That moment of appetite, really establishing appetite's key for us in building chapters, because if there's not an appetite for it, then maybe we do want it enough, in a sense. You want it to kind of
Mm.
put your money behind it and pursue it in an intentional way as well. I mean, I guess, and it's fair enough. There are other things, there are other opportunities, there are other ways of going about things, and needn't go down this way. But the short answer to what you're saying is kind of bootstrapping, bringing together civic leaders, sharing, what's going on in other cities and other places. Um, Often we talk about going upstream. So a service model, for example, churches will be heavily involved in social action programs around food hubs and homelessness action around homelessness, etc. But there's a point in which those churches want to try and tackle the causes of that and think about their agency upstream. Can we build more social housing? Can we build more transitional housing? Peterborough Citizens, for example, has just secured an agreement from the city council to run a transitional housing on a repurposed council building for transitional housing around tackling homelessness, etc. So that's quite attractive, because that's unsustainable, isn't it? To constantly, be, well, I don't need to say this to you, but constantly be, responding to crisis, as it were.
It's it's just so fascinating speaking to you, Tim. I mean, I think it's fairly well recognized that political participation is probably an important influence on health, but I don't know if it is really drawn attention to enough necessarily, really. And I thought it was really curious hearing after a considerable amount of experience you have in academic politics and the theories behind it, that it's been working with citizens where you've seen that craft. And I remember having some teaching on the craft. I remember as a student, we had some brief training on, I don't think it's only Marshall Ganz's actually, really, but in public narrative training. And ever after, you spot people using it and they use it to good effect. That kind of story of me, the story of us, the story of now. I think one of the famous examples is Barack Obama's speech to the Democratic convention back in the day. And I just worry sometimes, really, if political participation is important determinant of health, I think that is difficult to contest. Um, there's evidence like this all around the UK, but in Wales there was some research that came out a year or two ago around in areas like Ringland, where we're working in Norway. Um, we know there are a lot of challenges, and there's something very pejorative about talking about deprivation in the way that in public health and policy we often do. But putting that aside, the research was looking at the fact that I think, mainly kind of suburban peripheral communities, some of which may have been created for industry back in the day, the transport links are weaker. The digital links are weaker too in terms of kind of broadband and phone and the rest of it, people's access to computing. But whatever the reason for it, and I suspect part of it is newer communities have had less time for the institutions of the communities to develop, but they had less spaces to congregate in. They had less places to kind of meet and kind of come together in, village halls and the like. Um, but for all of those reasons and probably others, voter participation was lower, and it just seems like I mean, nothing's free, is it really? But it just seems like we're missing a bit of a trick of if we can look at that participation and political participation, voter participation, and those other things at the same time, it's going to have lasting impacts on a public service. It's going to have lasting impacts on health. And it also can get us to a more harmonious kind of relationship or situation between the institutions that are often at loggerheads, really, I think, right now. I don't know what you think.
I agree. Yeah, I think you put it really well. Yes, there's a phrase I'm hearing a lot is there's democratic well-being. I think the Carnegie UK did some research, brought out a report on this last year. But there's certainly scope for, for more research in this area. I mean, going back to my, you know, political philosophy days, Aristotle spoke about human beings as political animals in a way, which is, kind of part of what it is to be human, is to be, is to know how to do politics with others, do politics well, as it were. Um, no, I believe that. I think there's probably is more scope for research. Um, and what does if that turns out to be true, if that turns out to be the case, then health organizations, I guess, need to embrace it in a way that they're there's the, there's a kind of form of politics, if you like, or there's a good way of doing politics, which is conducive. This is part of what it is to flourish as a human being. And, also means you can act on stuff like, my son or daughter has got nothing to do, for large sections of the holidays. And apart from sitting in her bedroom on her phone or something like that, I mean, um, bringing back agency to change stuff. And it needn't be led. It doesn't need to be led by public health officials, and it can be led by citizens, in a sense. And none of this is rocket science. I mean, there's brilliant people, with brilliant ideas, solutions, etc. Um, but um, you know, people can, pick up, understand, pick up and their own issues, relate to others, and win change for themselves. And I don't think that the health consequences and the health benefits of that can be underestimated.
Brilliant. Well, just before we wrap up, Tim, I mean, I'm sure we can put in some links in the podcast and we can signpost people to Citizens Wales, Citizens UK. Just tell us briefly kind of what's on the horizon over the next kind of few months or year for Citizens UK. So if somebody listening in the UK or England or Wales, what might they be able to get involved with?
Yeah, great question. We're still in the aftermath of the general election, and we brought together. I should also say that we're non-partisan in that sense. We work with anyone that you know stands for public office, that is ready and willing to be held to account by others. So we've got that agenda, um, which is far-reaching, on living wage, particularly around um, the care sector, which is obviously crucial for health too. Um, Around just transition, around housing and homelessness, etc. So we that work. I mean, once you've got a politician to stand up and say, "Yes, we will work with you to, ensure fair wages in the care sector," that's not a done deal. You still, there's still the process of holding to account, the meetings, etc., the negotiations, the initial victory, the longer victory, etc. So all of that work of holding to account is what we're engaged in. And there are 20 alliances across the country. So if you just want to go onto the Citizens UK website, you find an alliance near you. All you need to join really is an institution. So most people are connected in some way with a school or a university or church or mosque. So you can reach out to us in that way too.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for your time today and for kind of taking us through all the subjects around community organizing, the history of Citizens UK, how we could engage this on a practical level and some of the nuances involved with it too. We'd love to have you on in the future again to kind of talk about where we've got to, I guess, really, months from now. But just a huge thank you again for your time and your wisdom.
My pleasure, Johnny.
Cheers, Tim.
Cheers.